Ryan Kessler stood at the center of a cavernous, luminescent chamber, surrounded by alien eyes that scrutinized him like a lab specimen. The air hummed with the sound of low, buzzing whispers in a dozen alien languages, punctuated by the occasional chitter or growl. To them, he wasn't a student, he was an anomaly. The lead instructor, a towering insectoid being named Professor Thrix, clacked its mandibles in what Ryan had come to understand as irritation. "Humans are an experimental addition to the Intergalactic Academic Union," Thrix announced, its voice echoing through the chamber. "We do not expect much. Your species is fragile." Laughter rippled through the assembly, though some of it was telepathic, a cold tingle Ryan felt prickling the edges of his mind. He clenched his fists and resisted the urge to snap back. It was his first day, and he wasn't about to prove them right by losing his temper. Instead, he squared his shoulders and steadied his surroundings. The academy, located on a massive artificial structure orbiting a gas giant, was nothing short of breathtaking. Walls made of shifting, iridescent material displayed star maps and flowing streams of data. His fellow students, a mix of crystalline beings, reptilian predators, and amorphous blobs, moved with a confidence born of knowing they belonged here. Ryan, in contrast, felt like an intruder in his own skin. "First assessment, endurance trials," Thrix continued, gesturing to a glowing track suspended in midair. "A simple task. Run until you can no longer continue. Observe your peers and learn." The track extended into the air like a ribbon of light, looping in gravity-defying arcs. The aliens lined up, some moving with fluid grace, others towering over Ryan with limbs designed for power. A bulky reptilian student beside him, who Ryan later learned was named Treshar, turned his elongated snout downward to sneer. "You won't last a lap, human," Treshar hissed, his voice dripping with condescension. "Save yourself the embarrassment." Ryan smirked, though his heart pounded. "Guess we'll find out." The starting chime rang out, and they were off. The aliens surged forward, their unique anatomies propelling them in ways Ryan could barely comprehend. Treshar bounded ahead on powerful legs, while a crystalline student named Sarah seemed to glide effortlessly, her translucent body refracting the track's light. Ryan lagged behind at first, focusing on finding his rhythm. His steps pounded against the track, each one a reminder of the difference between him and the others. Their superior biology gave them stamina and speed he couldn't hope to match. But Ryan had an advantage they didn't see coming: his tenacity. 2 laps in, some students began to falter. The crystalline glider slowed as fractures formed on her shimmering limbs. A gelatinous being collapsed into a quivering heap, its surface steaming from exertion. Treshar, however, seemed unstoppable, leaping across the track with predatory ease. He shot Ryan a mocking glance as he passed. "Still here, human? Impressive, for now." Ryan ignored him and focused on his breathing. His muscles burned, his lungs ached, and the taste of copper tinged his mouth, but he kept going. The aliens who had laughed at him earlier were now watching with a mix of confusion and curiosity. Fragile or not, he was still running. By the 4th lap, it was just Ryan and Treshar. The reptilian's smug expression faltered as he noticed Ryan's persistence. Ryan's legs felt like lead, his vision blurred at the edges, but he pushed forward, driven by something deeper than pride. He wasn't just running to prove them wrong, he was running because humans didn't quit. With a final burst of effort, Ryan crossed the lap marker just steps behind Treshar before collapsing to his knees, gasping for air. The chamber was silent, save for the sound of his ragged breathing. Professor Thrix clicked its mandibles again, this time in what Ryan could swear was approval. "Unexpected," it said. "Perhaps there is more to your species after all." Treshar growled but said nothing, his pride bruised. Ryan, still catching his breath, glanced up at the stunned faces around him and allowed himself a small, defiant grin. This was just the beginning. The expedition briefing room was eerily silent, save for the hum of holographic displays projecting a detailed 3D map of the relic site. Ryan sat in the back, nursing the ache in his legs from the endurance trials the day before. His muscles protested with every movement, but the faint pride in his chest dulled the pain. He'd proven he wasn't as fragile as they thought. Now he just had to survive the next challenge. Attention, students, Professor Thrix announced, its multifaceted eyes scanning the room. Today, you will embark on your first joint exploration assignment. Your objective is to study and document an ancient artifact discovered on planet Vestra 7. The hologram zoomed in on a desolate world shrouded in storms. At its center, a glowing relic pulsed faintly, radiating waves of light. Ryan leaned forward, captivated. The relic looked like a jagged crystal, surrounded by faint ripples of energy that distorted the surrounding terrain. It was beautiful and unsettling. The relic predates even our most ancient civilizations, Thrix continued. Its origin remains unknown, but preliminary scans indicate traces of dormant energy signatures. You will work in teams to analyze its properties while adhering to strict safety protocols. Ryan caught Treshar smirking from across the room. The reptilian's tail flicked lazily, betraying his disinterest. Safety protocols, Treshar muttered under his breath. Leave it to the humans to need rules for everything. Ryan ignored him, focusing instead on the details of the mission. Vestra VII's atmosphere was breathable but unstable, and its gravity was slightly higher than Earth's. A challenge, but not insurmountable. He trained for this, and he wasn't about to let a sarcastic lizard throw him off. The shuttle descended through turbulent clouds, buffeted by winds that howled like living things. Ryan tightened his harness, glancing at his teammates. He'd been paired with Sarah, the crystalline being whose body shimmered faintly in the dim light, and Breck, a squat, armored alien with a gruff demeanor and 4 arms. You okay, human? Breck rumbled, his voice deep and gravelly. You look pale. Ryan managed a weak smile. Just seasick in the sky. No big deal. Sarah tilted her translucent head, her voice chiming like wind through glass. Your humor is strange, but I find it oddly endearing. Glad to hear it, Ryan replied, gripping the armrest as the shuttle lurched again. Just let me know if I turn green. That's not normal for humans. The shuttle landed with a heavy thud, and the hatch hissed open. Vestra VII's landscape stretched before them, barren and alien. Jagged black rocks jetted from the ground like broken teeth, and the air was thick with static. The relic's faint glow was visible even from a distance, a beacon in the desolation. The team moved cautiously, their boots crunching on the rocky terrain. As they approached, the relic's energy grew palpable, a low, thrumming vibration that seemed to resonate in Ryan's bones. Sarah extended a crystalline limb, her body reflecting the relic's light. It's beautiful, she said softly. And dangerous, Ryan added, eyeing the uneven ripples in the air around it. Does anyone else see that distortion? Breck grunted. Probably harmless. Just residual energy. Ryan wasn't convinced. Something about the relic felt wrong, like standing too close to a live wire. He crouched, scanning the area with his portable analyzer. The readings were erratic, spiking and dropping without explanation. Guys? This thing is anything but stable, he said, his voice tight. We should keep our distance until... Before he could finish, Tresher's voice echoed across the comms. Humans and their paranoia. Watch and learn, Kessler. Ryan turned to see Treshar approaching the relic, his clawed feet crunching over the rocky ground. The reptilian reached out, his hand stopping just shy of the glowing crystal. Treshar, don't! Ryan shouted. But it was too late. The relic pulsed, a blinding flash of light radiating outward. Ryan's ears rang as he was thrown backward, landing hard on the jagged ground. Pain shot through his shoulder, but he forced himself upright, blinking away the afterimage of the explosion. When his vision cleared, chaos had erupted. Several students lay sprawled on the ground, groaning. Sarah's body had fractured, faint cracks spreading across her crystalline limbs. Breck was already on his feet, dragging another student to safety. And Treshar, arrogant, overconfident Treshar, was unconscious near the relic, his scales blackened in patches. Ryan scrambled to his feet, adrenaline overriding the pain. Everyone, back to the shuttle. Now. The relic, Sarah murmured, her voice weak. It's waking up. Ryan turned toward the artifact, his stomach sinking. The once dormant relic now pulsed erratically, its energy spreading like ripples in a pond. The air grew heavier, charged with a malevolent force that made every instinct in Ryan scream to run. But he couldn't. Not yet. "Help me get them up," he said to Breck, already moving toward Treshar. "We're not leaving anyone behind." Even as fear clawed at his mind, Ryan refused to back down. He'd seen enough to know that whatever had been unleashed was far from over. The silence after the explosion was deafening, a heavy, unnatural quiet broken only by the faint hum of the relic's pulsating energy. Ryan crouched over Treshar's unconscious form, his heart pounding as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. The reptilian scales were scorched, his chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. For someone who had mocked Ryan's species, he now looked painfully fragile. "We need to move," Ryan said, his voice sharp. "Sarah, Breck, get the others back to the shuttle. I'll handle Treshar." Breck's armored frame loomed over him, for arms already busy hauling another injured student onto his broad shoulders. "And what happens when this thing decides to explode again, huh? You're not exactly indestructible, human." Ryan shot him a glance. "Neither are you. Get moving." Breck grunted but didn't argue, turning to follow Sarah, whose crystalline limbs still glimmered faintly despite the fractures marring her body. The other students, though injured, began to stagger toward the shuttle. Ryan hoisted Treshar into a fireman's carry, his muscles screaming in protest. The weight of the reptilian's massive frame pressed against his shoulders, but Ryan gritted his teeth and pushed forward. Behind him, the relic's glow intensified, its light flickering erratically like a heartbeat out of sync. He could feel it, a low vibration that seemed to pulse in his chest, tugging at his mind like an unseen force. "Don't look back," Ryan muttered to himself, each step heavier than the last. "Just keep moving." By the time they reached the shuttle, the storm had grown worse. The winds howled, and lightning crackled across the darkened sky. Breck helped Ryan haul Treshar into a seat, securing him with a harness before turning to check on the others. Sarah was hunched over an analyzer, her crystalline body glowing faintly as she worked to stabilize the students with more serious injuries. But something wasn't right. Ryan felt it in the air, a pressure that hadn't been there before. It pressed against his mind, subtle but insistent, like the faint hum of a distant alarm that wouldn't stop. "What's that noise?" he asked, looking around the cabin. "Do you hear it?" Breck frowned, his four hands busy securing supplies. "What noise?" "It's like a buzzing." Ryan rubbed his temples, the sound growing louder, sharper. He turned toward the shuttle's viewport, his breath catching. Outside, the relic's glow had changed. The light was no longer steady, it pulsed in rapid, jagged rhythms, the energy radiating outward in shimmering waves. And then he saw them. Figures began to emerge from the relic's glow, their forms indistinct at first, like shadows struggling to take shape. But as they stepped into the storm's light, Ryan's stomach dropped. It was the students who had been closest to the relic when it exploded, but they weren't the same. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, as if their bodies were being pulled by invisible strings. Their eyes glowed with the same sickly light as the relic, and their faces were blank, devoid of recognition or emotion. "Professor Thrix?" Sarah's voice trembled as she activated the comms. "We have a situation." The instructor's voice crackled through the speakers, calm but distant. "Report." "The relic, it's doing something to the others," Ryan said, cutting in. He hesitated, searching for the right words. "They're not themselves." "Describe their behavior," Thrix ordered, its tone clinical. "They're moving like they're being controlled," Ryan said, his pulse quickening. "And they're heading straight for us." The shuttle's interior grew tense as the others turned toward the viewport. The infected students were closing in, their glowing eyes locked onto the shuttle. Breck stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the hatch as he unslung a plasma rifle from the wall. "Anyone got a better plan than shooting them?" he asked grimly. Ryan's mind raced. Killing them wasn't an option, these were their classmates, their peers. But whatever the relic had done, it wasn't going to let them go without a fight. "We can't hurt them," Ryan said firmly. "We don't know if they can be saved." Breck's mandibles clicked in frustration. "Then what do you suggest, genius?" Ryan looked around the cabin, his gaze landing on Sarah's analyzer. "That relic, it's broadcasting something, right?" If we can figure out the frequency, maybe we can disrupt it. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. It's possible, but I'll need time to scan for the signal. Then we buy you time, Ryan said, grabbing a stun baton from the supply rack. His hands were shaking, but he gripped the weapon tightly, forcing himself to focus. We hold them off without hurting them. Long enough for you to find a solution. Breck snorted. You've got guts, human. I'll give you that. The infected students reached the shuttle, their glowing eyes staring unblinking through the viewport. One of them, a gelatinous being with a fractured, shimmering surface, raised a limb and slammed it against the hull. The shuttle rocked under the force, and Sarah's voice was urgent. I need 5 minutes. Ryan glanced at Breck, his jaw set. Then let's make sure you get it. As the first infected student breached the hatch, Ryan stepped forward, ready to fight, not to win, but to protect. Because humanity didn't back down, no matter how impossible the odds. The infected students surged into the shuttle like a tidal wave of chaos. Their movements were alien, jerky, and unnatural, as if invisible wires yanked their limbs into action. Glowing eyes locked on the uninfected students, radiating cold malice. Ryan barely had time to process the danger before the first of them lunged. He sidestepped just in time, swinging his stun baton in a tight arc. The baton crackled as it connected with the infected student, a crystalline alien who once moved with elegance but now thrashed like a puppet. The strike sent the attacker stumbling, but they didn't stay down. Breck! Lock the hatch! Ryan shouted, his voice hoarse. The hulking alien slammed the hatch controls, sealing the shuttle. It won't hold them for long, Breck growled, gripping his plasma rifle. If they get through, we're finished. Sarah's voice rang out from the corner, calm but tense. I've isolated the relic signal, but it's complex, layered. I need more time to decode it. Time's not on our side. Ryan snapped, ducking as another infected student clawed at him through the narrowing gap of the hatch. He could feel the pressure mounting, not just the physical threat, but the oppressive hum of the relic's energy thrumming in his skull. It was like a storm in his mind, a constant buzz that made it hard to think, let alone plan. Breck fired a warning shot, the plasma bolt hissing as it struck the ground near the attackers. The infected didn't flinch. Instead, they redoubled their efforts, slamming against the shuttle with enough force to make the walls groan. What's the play, Kessler? Breck demanded, his eyes narrowing. We're running out of options. Ryan gritted his teeth, gripping the baton so tightly his knuckles turned white. Pain radiated through his shoulder from the earlier fall, but he shoved it aside. Pain was temporary. Right now, survival was the only thing that mattered. We stall, Ryan said, breathing hard. Whatever this signal is, it's controlling them. If Sarah can disrupt it, we might have a shot at bringing them back. And if we can't? Breck asked, his tone grim. Ryan met his gaze, unflinching. Then we make sure they don't take us down with them. The next few minutes were a blur of frantic movement and desperate improvisation. The infected clawed and pounded at the shuttle, each impact reverberating through the small space. Ryan and Breck worked in tandem, Breck using his sheer strength to hold the line, Ryan darting in and out to keep the attackers off balance. One of the infected, a gelatinous being with a fractured, shimmering surface, slipped through a crack in the hatch. It lunged at Sarah, its glowing tendrils reaching for her as she worked furiously at the analyzer. Sarah, move! Ryan shouted, diving toward the attacker. He tackled the creature mid-lunge, his body slamming into the hard floor. The gelatinous mass writhed under him, its tendrils wrapping around his arm and squeezing with unnatural strength. Pain shot through his body, but Ryan gritted his teeth and swung the baton, delivering a sharp jolt that sent the creature slumping to the ground. Thanks, Sarah said, her voice tight. Her fractured body glimmered faintly as she returned to her work. Almost there. Almost isn't good enough. Breck growled, firing another shot at the growing mass of infected outside the shuttle. They're getting through. Ryan staggered to his feet, his arm throbbing where the tendrils had gripped him. His vision swam, but he forced himself to focus. He couldn't afford to slow down. Every second they held on was a second closer to a solution. Come on, Sarah, he muttered under his breath, glancing toward the analyzer. We need a miracle here. Finally, Sarah straightened, her crystalline body glowing with a sudden burst of light. I've got it. I can send a countersignal through the relic's frequency. It should disrupt the parasite's control. Ryan's chest heaved with relief. Then do it. Sarah's hands moved in a blur over the controls, and moments later, a sharp, piercing tone filled the shuttle. The infected froze mid-attack, their bodies trembling as if caught in an invisible current. One by one, they collapsed, their glowing eyes dimming. The oppressive hum in Ryan's mind faded, replaced by an eerie silence. Ryan sagged against the wall, his limbs heavy with exhaustion. His shoulder throbbed, his vision blurred, but he was alive. They all were. It worked, Breck said, his voice a mix of disbelief and relief. You actually pulled it off. Sarah nodded, but her glowing form seemed dimmer, her movements sluggish. The countersignal is temporary. The relic's energy is still active, we need to destroy it before it regains control. Ryan pushed himself upright, his body protesting with every movement. Then let's finish this. The relic wasn't going to stop, not unless they made it. And Ryan wasn't about to let all this be for nothing. The path back to the relic site felt like a march into the jaws of death. The storm on Vestra 7 had worsened, swirling black clouds blotting out the pale sun. Lightning streaked across the sky, and the wind howled like a living thing. Ryan's muscles screamed with every step, his injured shoulder a dull, throbbing ache that refused to fade. But he pressed on, leading the way with Breck and Sarah close behind. Behind them, the shuttle was a makeshift sanctuary for the recovering students, now freed from the parasite's control. But the relief was short-lived. Sarah's countersignal was already starting to wane, and the glow in the infected students' eyes had begun to flicker ominously. Time was running out. We need to reach the relic before the signal fades, Sarah said, her crystalline voice strained. If it regains control, it'll be stronger. It might not just affect those infected, it could spread to us, too. Ryan glanced back at her, noting the faint fractures that still marred her glowing limbs. She was barely holding herself together, but there was no hesitation in her voice. Then we don't stop until it's done, he said, forcing himself to ignore the stabbing pain in his shoulder. No matter what. The relic site loomed ahead, a jagged monolith of alien energy. Its pulsing glow was no longer erratic, it had stabilized into a steady, sinister rhythm, like the heartbeat of some slumbering beast. The air was thick with static, each step toward it making Ryan's skin crawl. He could feel the relic's presence in his mind, a faint whisper growing louder with every passing second. Don't let it get in your head, Breck growled, gripping his plasma rifle tightly. That's how it starts. Ryan nodded, his jaw set. He could already feel the relic's whispers clawing at the edges of his thoughts, tempting him to turn back, to give up. But he wouldn't. Not now. Sarah, how close do you need to be to shut this thing down? He asked. Sarah hesitated, her glowing form flickering faintly. Close enough to connect directly with its energy field. That means I'll have to get within a few meters. Breck shot her a look. You won't survive that. The energy's unstable. I don't need to survive it, Sarah said quietly, her voice like the shattering of glass. I just need to finish the job. No, Ryan said, his voice sharp. We're not doing this if it costs you your life. We'll find another way. There isn't time, Sarah replied, meeting his gaze with a steady determination. If we don't stop it here, it won't matter what happens to me. It'll take all of us. Ryan's fists clenched. Every instinct screamed at him to fight, to protect her, but deep down, he knew she was right. Still, there had to be another way, some way to stop the relic without losing anyone else. The ground beneath their feet trembled as they approached, the relic's energy intensifying. The storm above seemed to swirl in tandem with its pulse, lightning striking closer with every beat. Ryan stopped short, an idea forming in his mind. The storm, he muttered, his voice almost drowned out by the wind. What about it? Breck asked, his tone impatient. It's already unstable, Ryan said, his thoughts racing. If we can channel a lightning strike directly into the relic, it might overload its energy field and destroy it. That's insane, Breck said flatly. And dangerous. Ryan cracked a grim smile. Would you expect anything less? Sarah tilted her head, considering. It could work, but you'd need to position a conductor near the relic to draw the lightning. And the closer it is, the higher the risk. Ryan nodded, already moving. I'll do it. Ryan, no. Sarah's voice rang out, sharp and clear. You're injured. If you get any closer to that thing. Then I'll make it count, he said, cutting her off. You said it yourself, there isn't time. And this way, you don't have to sacrifice yourself. Brett grumbled but didn't argue. Instead, he handed Ryan the long, metal rod from his gear pack. If you're doing this, at least do it right. Ryan took the rod, the weight of it solid in his hands. Every step toward the relic felt heavier, the air growing hotter, thicker, as if the atmosphere itself resisted his approach. His body screamed at him to stop, but he kept moving, each step a defiance of the pain and fear clawing at him. He reached the edge of the relic's energy field, the glow blinding and the whispers in his mind deafening. Raising the rod, he plunged it into the ground, positioning it like a lightning rod directly in the relic's path. Now, Sarah, he shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. Sarah activated her device, amplifying the storm's energy and directing it toward the rod. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening crack, a bolt of lightning tore through the sky, striking the rod and channeling its energy directly into the relic. The relic screamed, a high-pitched, piercing wail that seemed to echo in Ryan's skull. The light intensified, then exploded outward in a blinding flash. Ryan was thrown backward, the force of the blast slamming him into the ground. When the light faded, the relic was gone. Only a charred crater remained, the storm above finally beginning to subside. Ryan lay on the ground, his body battered and broken, but alive. He looked up to see Sarah and Breck rushing toward him, their faces, human and alien, etched with relief. It's over, Ryan whispered, his voice barely audible. But he wasn't sure if he meant the battle, or himself. Ryan drifted in and out of consciousness, his body a tapestry of pain. Faint voices reached him, muted and distant, like echoes in a cave. When he finally managed to pry his eyes open, the world was a blur of light and shadow. Slowly, the faces of Sarah and Breck came into focus, their expressions tight with concern. He's awake, Sarah said, relief clear in her crystalline tones. Her body glimmered faintly, though the fractures in her form hadn't fully healed. Ryan tried to sit up, but Breck's massive hand pushed him gently back down. Easy, human, the hulking alien said. You're tougher than you look, but even you have limits. Ryan coughed, his voice weak. Did it work? Sarah nodded, her glow pulsing faintly. The relic's energy is gone. Whatever control it had over the others has been severed. A wave of relief washed over Ryan, though it did little to dull the pain radiating through his body. And the others? They're alive, Sarah said. Disoriented, but recovering. They don't remember much, which might be for the best. Ryan let out a shaky breath, his head sinking back against the makeshift cot in the shuttle. The storm outside had subsided, leaving the barren landscape eerily quiet. For the first time in hours, the air felt still. By the time they returned to the academy, Ryan's injuries had been stabilized, though he still felt like a collection of broken parts barely held together. The shuttle bay was a flurry of activity as medical teams rushed to assist the injured students. Ryan watched as his classmates, once infected and mindless, now staggered out of the shuttle with dazed expressions. The sight of them walking under their own power was enough to make the pain in his body feel worth it. Professor Thrix approached, its insectoid frame casting a long shadow. Its multifaceted eyes fixed on Ryan with an intensity that made him uneasy. You have done what I believed impossible, Thrix said, its mandibles clicking softly. You, a fragile human, have demonstrated resilience that defies logic. Ryan managed a faint smile. I'm not sure fragile fits anymore. Perhaps not, Thrix conceded. It gestured to the recovering students. You saved them at great personal risk. The Academy, and the Union, will not forget this. The praise felt heavy, almost suffocating. Ryan wasn't used to being the center of attention, and he certainly didn't feel like a hero. He had done what anyone should have done, what anyone would have done. Wouldn't they? Later, in the Academy's infirmary, Ryan sat on the edge of his cot, watching as Sarah repaired the fractures in her crystalline limbs with a specialized device. Brick was nearby, polishing his plasma rifle, though the way his shoulders relaxed hinted at his relief. "You never answered my question," Sarah said, breaking the silence. Ryan frowned. "Which question?" "Why did you volunteer to plant the conductor? You knew the risks. You could have died." Ryan hesitated, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Because someone had to," he said simply. "And if it wasn't me, it would have been you or Brick. I wasn't about to let that happen." Brick snorted, his mandibles clicking in amusement. "You're either the bravest human I've ever met, or the dumbest. Why not both?" Ryan quipped, earning a faint laugh from Sarah. But her gaze remained serious. "You've shown us something profound, Ryan. Strength isn't just about biology or durability. It's about resolve, about pushing forward when everything in you says to stop." Ryan shrugged, wincing as the motion tugged at his injured shoulder. "Humans are stubborn like that." Sarah tilted her head, her glowing form catching the light. "It's more than stubbornness. It's resilience. And it's something we could all learn from." The days that followed were a blur of recovery and reflection. The incident with the relic became a defining moment for the Academy, sparking debates about humanity's role in the Union. For centuries, strength had been measured in physical terms: durability, stamina, power. But Ryan's actions had challenged that notion, forcing the galaxy to reevaluate its assumptions. Treshar, once Ryan's most vocal critic, approached him in the cafeteria one afternoon, his scales gleaming under the artificial light. "Kessler," he said, his tone grudging but sincere. "You've earned my respect. For what it's worth, I was wrong about you, and about your species." Ryan raised an eyebrow, surprised but not ungrateful. "Thanks, Treshar. Coming from you, that means a lot." The reptilian nodded, his tail flicking once before he turned and left. Ryan watched him go, a small smile tugging at his lips. He hadn't set out to earn anyone's respect, but knowing he had made an impact felt good. In the weeks that followed, Ryan found himself at the center of a growing conversation about humanity's potential. What had started as an experiment, a probationary inclusion into the Union, was now a topic of serious debate. Humans, once dismissed as fragile and insignificant, were being seen in a new light. As Ryan looked out at the stars from the Academy's observation deck, he felt a quiet sense of pride. He wasn't a hero. He was just a guy who refused to quit. But maybe, in a galaxy full of advanced species, that refusal to give up was exactly what humanity brought to the table. Whatever the future held, Ryan knew one thing for certain: humans weren't just part of the galaxy now, they were here to stay.